This is Inside the Commission, a Gambling Commission podcast. Welcome to Inside the Commission, a podcast all about gambling in Great Britain. Here we'll cover all the latest topics and trends from across the gambling sector and discuss the big issues that matter to you. From consumer queries to industry insights, we'll bring you the facts from the front line of regulation and share the stats and stories from those in the know. For all the latest discussions and updates, you can subscribe to our Gambling Commission YouTube channel, or you can find us on your preferred platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Welcome back to part 2 of our episode on our fair and open licensing objective with Chief Executive Andrew Rhodes.
Where do we draw the line then? Because a lot of consumers look to us as the regulator, as the police in some sort of way, as we can get involved in all of these cases. And is it just through the LCCP or the rulebook, or how do we actually make it so it's simpler for people to understand if they've got a problem around withdrawals or ID checks and those sorts of issues and problems?
Yeah.
Is it straightforward?
I don't think it is entirely straightforward. I mean, this is why when we gave our advice on the white paper, we said we thought there should be a statutory ombudsman. The Commission is not a big organisation in the scheme of things. Globally, as a regulator, we're quite a big gambling regulator compared to other countries, but not in really big numbers. And that's just because our market is just more developed and has been around for longer, right? But we couldn't be an ombudsman. And I think, where do we draw the line? And we have to look at what the overall strategic issues are. So withdrawals and transparency for consumers about why they've been asked to do something, why they've been restricted, why have they been stake factored. I saw a case recently, and I won't go into the details for obvious reasons, where a consumer had been told you've been subject to a Gambling Commission mandated affordability check. They hadn't. Erroneous data had come back from a different source, absolutely nothing to do with regulatory requirements or the Gambling Commission, and that customer was frankly misled. And things like that are muddying the waters, and I think our job is to drive things forward in terms of clarity for consumers. But you can only take that so far, because if there are money laundering concerns, for example, or concerns about fraud, which does come up quite often, then you can't tip off an individual. Well, I suspect you might be committing fraud, or I suspect you might be laundering money, or I suspect this might be proceeds of criminal activity. There's a proper process for that. There's fraud intelligence units, and there's obviously general law enforcement as well as us. So it becomes quite complicated. But I don't think anyone should throw their hands up and go, well, therefore we can't work it out. It's just not straightforward.
What's the industry's role in it? What would you say to someone listening from the industry now in terms of withdrawals and ID checks?
They've got to be really clear, right? So I think the industry's got a couple of obligations. One is, if you want lower friction at the point of entry, you cannot simply introduce friction later on, right? We're really, really clear about that. So you need to know who your customer is. You're required to. So you should be getting the information you need at the beginning, right? And doing that as swiftly and as unintrusively as you can, right, within reason. I think the industry's got to be really clear with consumers about why it's doing certain things or why it's asking for certain things. I'm not sure there are many other sectors where you would get away with, saying some of those, doing some of those things, saying, well, I'm not going to take your business now without any explanation, or I'm going to ask you for a load of information and not explain why. And I don't think the industry's been very good at that. Now I say that, and I should step back a little bit actually, because I do think one of the problems for the gambling industry is it gets treated as a single homogenous industry, and it isn't. It isn't. So we license. I looked the other day in a conversation. I think there are 2,702 or something licensees that were on the register. Now, some of those will be really tiny, and some of them will be the huge groups that that we know about. Right, 50% of gross gambling yield is in the hands of 3 or 4 of those groups. So we've got to be careful not to say the industry, because not everyone does it all the time. But I do think the industry generally hasn't been very good at this, and I think it's hidden behind, at times, blaming the regulator, because we can't comment on individual cases, so it gets really difficult to say, no, that's not true. Now, I don't think that's really about defending reputation as a regulator, because I don't think that should be our key focus. But I do think consumers are owed better explanations as to why things are happening for them.
So more transparency in terms of the process and what it will look like.
Well, why? Why are you being asked for something? There will be times when you can't say something is not, but it's not all the time. And I've seen too many cases where it's not something they were unable to say anything about. I just think it needs to be better, and I think that needs to mature a bit within the industry.
So I suppose if you've got consumers who are then frustrated, as you said, we're not the ombudsman, we don't deal with the complaints. Is it the best route for those complaints to go through an alternative dispute resolution service?
I mean, well, that is how the system works. So firstly, you should exhaust the complaints process for the operator, because an ADR will generally refer you back if you haven't done that. So it's not something that you escalate to straight away. You should exhaust that, then you should go to an ADR. And one of the things, as I said earlier on, we've said there should be an ombudsman that deals with these issues and also social responsibility issues, because that doesn't exist at the moment. And that's something that government said it would take forward from the white paper, and we'll wait and see what happens. But yeah, consumers should be going to an ADR if they've not had a satisfactory answer from the operator.
Okay, that's really helpful. So if we go back to the fair and open discussion then, and in terms of technology and how that's now going to change the landscape, things like AI, for example, and how that sort of is going to be a massive change, not just for gaming and gambling, but for every industry, I suppose. What sort of challenges does that pose for us as a regulator? And, you know, if the industry is forging ahead and evolving at a rapid rate, how are we keeping up with that sort of stuff, especially thinking with our fair and open hat on?
So there's a couple of things going on around AI. Operators' use of AI at the moment is mostly around trying to drive consistency of things like interventions. So not necessarily interventions by AI, but understanding through use of AI and its ability to assimilate large amounts of information very quickly, whether or not their approach is consistent. I think that feels like a pretty sensible thing. There are other applications, I think, that will start to come along around AI in terms of, you know, how they improve their margin, etc. I'm not quite sure how that will work yet. There are examples of bots being used on the consumer side of things, which I think have really affected certain products. There's a lot of talk. I don't know. It wouldn't be our space, but I don't know what this looks like in full reality. But there's a lot of talk about poker and bots and how that's, you know, influenced online poker. Certainly counterparts in Europe have talked about bots and AI being used around betting on multiple lines, multiple accounts. There's been recent National Crime Agency alerts about identity spoofing through AI. So people paying for services will spoof a load of documents for you to try and get around KYC and things like that. That I think is going to pose loads of challenges, because when you start to think about that, it's starting to attack the very core of know your customer. And how does the operator know that they're really dealing with the person they think they are? That opens up all kinds of other risks, and I think that's going to be an effort that's far wider than just the Gambling Commission. And I think our own work around technology and data and insight has been growing in the last few years. We've been investing heavily in research, insight, our understanding of technology, trying different approaches and iterating different things around information and how we can get a more accurate picture of what's happening and detect things much earlier. I don't know, people have been critical of the gambling survey for Great Britain, but it's a massive step forward. Compared to the health survey, which was excellent in its time, we're able to see things far more frequently at a higher level, greater granularity. There aren't multi-year gaps between surveys. There isn't a year-long gap between the fieldwork and the outputs. That's giving us a tremendous amount. The analysis that we've done around open banking data and what that's telling us about consumers' real patterns of behaviour is really insightful and important, and I think we need to be doing more and more of that. because we have to have a really refined understanding of what's going on so that we aren't taking a really broad brush to risks. We're looking, we identify what they are and look for them in specific places. And I think that's what the future of regulation will be, is much more targeted intervention. And that really is what sits behind financial risk checks as well, which again, been talked about a lot, very heavily criticised in certain quarters. But what that is actually about is utilising available data and technology to not actually ask people questions where they don't need to be asked. It's to remove friction that exists in the system now, which is quite an analogue approach to something that would be more accurate, more reliable, and far less intrusive. And I think that is where all of this is going to. You will always have the counterbalance of people's privacy concerns. And that, I think, is a fairly obvious challenge for people in this day and age. And I don't think it's for me to figure out the answers to all of that, but I think it's going to continue to test us.
Okay. So as we come to the end of this particular episode, did you just want to sum up in terms of your message to the industry and to our listeners in terms of the fair and open licensing objective, and in a summation where we're going, what our feeling is from a commission point of view, and what message you want them to take away from today?
I think I'd start with, there are three objectives that the commission, three licensing objectives the commission's got. I think there was in years gone by, and I think for understandable reasons, a much heavier emphasis on the one about protecting the vulnerable. And that's not to say that you stop doing that in order to do the others. What we've been able to do with the changes we've made to resourcing is try to focus much more evenly across those three objectives. So on the fair and open objective, it's recognising there is far more tension and far more, I think, unwanted contact and friction within the overall system that supports gambling. So things like withdrawals, restrictions, factoring and things like that, which is a balance between the industry protecting itself from certain things, but it shouldn't be disadvantaging consumers unfairly. And that's what we're really focused on, is not trying to manage the market. That isn't our job, but to make sure that the industry is behaving responsibly and it's transparent. That's really where our focus is. Whilst we don't deal with individual cases, doesn't mean we don't look at them. I personally looked at quite a lot of cases, which, whilst I don't think it's for me to intervene and fix them, I think it is important to see what the examples are and what story they're really telling us. And there's a long way to go on this yet. And I've been quite open in public with the industry about my challenge to it and sort of what I expected to do in terms of transparency. That hasn't happened yet. But that just means that we will do something to make it happen.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, taking the time to answer those questions.
Cheers.
This is Inside the Commission, a Gambling Commission podcast. To stay up to date with the latest content, you can subscribe to our Gambling Commission YouTube channel, or you can find us on your preferred platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening.